Okay, so this is the second survey strategy session where we're going to talk about phase 2 of the survey strategy simulations. My name is Lynn Jones, and I'm presenting here today on behalf of the survey strategy team, that's the project team. We generate the survey simulations that the SEOC and the rest of people in the community can look at. So just a reminder, we all signed a agreement of code of conduct when we signed up for this workshop, and any harassment or discrimination will not be tolerated. So be kind. And also a reminder that this session is being recorded. So if you don't want to be on camera, please make sure you have your camera turned off. You can ask questions on Slack. That's the preferred method. Please don't ask questions in the Zoom channel because it won't be saved at the end. Or the Slack will be available and people can see that. So there are 3 sessions here about survey strategy for the LSST at this year's project and community workshop. This is session 2 out of the 3. Earlier today, Jelko talked about the SEOC process and timeline, including an overview of the phase 1 SEOC recommendations. Sorry, the SEOC is the Survey Cadence Optimization Committee. They are a group who are made up of members of the community, and they are advising the project on the survey strategy. In this session, we will talk about the plan for the phase 2 simulations. I'll talk in a second about what phase 2 means. And these simulations will be released shortly. Tomorrow, Thursday, there will be one more session where the science collaborations will discuss survey strategy, and this is organized by Sarah Benito. So the simulations we'll talk about here today are stage 2, or basically phase 2 of the process with the SEOC. These are building on community observing strategy plan, the 2018 white papers, and the cadence notes. And these are all things that the community has contributed. In addition, it's building on metrics that the community have written and contributed. So I just would like to take a moment and say thank you to all the members of the community that have contributed to this work. This does reflect real work by the community, and we appreciate it very much. This is all help that is going to make the LSSD the best possible survey that we can. So in that process, you can look at the process of the survey cadence optimization as a series of phases. We started with initial survey simulations such as OPSIM 3.61 and Minion 1016, and even baseline 2018A, if these are ringing any bells, they're fairly old simulations. These we could kind of group together as phase 0. They were all created by the old OPSIM software, and they culminated in the 2018 Fall for White papers. So that's sort of up until 2018. Those simulations let us understand the potential for LSSD and probably captured something like 80 to 90% of the capability, generally speaking. Currently, we're finishing the wrap up of phase 1, where the survey strategy team, that's us, released a series of simulations based on the feature-based scheduler. And these were responses to the SAC, the Science Advisory Council report that was based on the 2018 white papers. So we sent out phase 0 simulations, people wrote white papers. The Science Advisory Committee put together a series of recommendations. We sent out phase 1 simulations that were based on those responses. The most relevant set of simulations from phase 1 include our V1.5, 1.6, and 1.7 and 1.7.1 simulations. And these evaluated a very wide range of survey strategies, looking for gains that would be, we expected to be on the order of 10% or so. So it's like finishing up and filling in the pieces, the gaps in the starting point from the phase 0 baseline strategy. Those simulations led to the 2020 cadence notes, which the SCOC, this Survey Cadence Optimization Committee, are currently synthesizing into their phase 1 recommendations. That's the draft report that Joko talked about earlier. So currently, we as the project team are working on creating phase 2 simulations. These will be created with our new software package called RibbonSim. This still uses the feature-based scheduler, so it's very similar to the previous ranges. We've just repackaged our software so it's easier to install. These phase 2 simulations will be fewer and more targeted than the phase 1 simulations. So we'll have most likely on the order of 40 to 50 simulations instead of hundreds. And the general areas we're working on include updating the survey footprint, adding more rolling cadence simulations, internight cadence, U-band, deep drilling fields to some extent, and microsurveys. I'll talk more in detail about each of these in a minute. We expect phase 2 to conclude with a final survey, baseline survey strategy recommendation from the SCOC, and that will be sometime at the end of 2022. And at that point, we enter what I've been calling phase 3, where we'll be working on tune-ups to that baseline survey strategy and implementing it for commissioning and preparing for and learning from commissioning. During that time period, the SCOC will also be working on early science and understanding how to fold in early science to the survey strategy. So we talk a little bit about those phase 2 simulations. These simulations are based on SCOC feedback from the cadence notes and from the 2018 white papers. One thing that became clear from the phase 1 simulations that we sent out was that the original old style baseline footprint was lacking in some areas, is lacking in galactic bulge coverage, and also that there was a desire for more coverage of dust-free sky rather than just covering the entire deck band that we had in the original baseline. So we could see that it was reflected in the footprints and the bulges family in the phase 1 simulations and the metrics that we have incorporated into math and that people were writing about in their cadence notes. We're coming to a compromise on where to place this area on the sky while still maintaining a high number of visits per pointing for variables and transients is somewhat tricky, but through that, we've come to this updated baseline footprint. It includes about 10% more dust-free area than the previous baseline footprint. It adds galactic bulge coverage and Magellanic cloud coverage at wide, fast, deep levels. It maintains the northern ecliptic spur, the background galactic plane visits, as well as 5 deep drilling fields and the South Celestial Pole. As a matter of policy from the SCOC, we've adopted 2 by 15-second visits in G, R, I, Z, and Y. This is the project standard and must remain so until commissioning. However, with read noise having such an impact in U-band, we have adopted 1 by 30-second visits in U-band. The pair separation in the entire sky has been extended to 33 minutes from 22 minutes in the old baseline. This increases the survey efficiency slightly, and it improves detectability for more distant transient tuning objects while maintaining a high rate of pair acquisition, and we don't lose NEOs. The pairs of visits are extended into twilight, where previously we had taken single visits during twilight, but now we have improved our scheduler algorithms. So now we take pairs during twilight, but with an interval of only 15 minutes instead of 33. This accounts for the more rapidly changing sky brightness during twilight. The pairs of visits during the night are in different filters. This allows for improved color measurements of variables and transients. We do have occasional pairs in wideband that are just wideband. So these plots here, this is on the left, it's the traditional view of the sky that we always show for the survey footprint. On the right is the same survey footprint, but I rotated it by 180 degrees. So it's just the sky at different orientations. So what happens in this with this new baseline? We have a similar amount of sky in wide fast deep-like areas. It's about on the order of 18,000 square degrees. But overall, the survey footprint is larger. It requires more time because we now have more parts of the sky which have a few hundreds of visits. So this is the NES and the background galactic plane. The result is that the number of visits per pointing in the wide fast deep falls by a small amount compared to the previous baseline. And if you try to compare this to quite a few baselines ago where we had 30-second snaps, it's quite a few less visits. So we know that with less visits, the inter-night gap, that's the time between coming back to the field on different nights, increases. The inter-night gap increases. And that drops the supernova 1A discovery rate. So we added a 2-band rolling cadence throughout the dust-free wide fast deep area to boost the supernova detection metric. In phase 1 simulations, we saw that the supernova detections increased by about 25% when we added rolling cadence. So this was our starting point for our baseline simulation. And in that little movie, which played and didn't loop, unfortunately, there's you can see the rolling cadence going through the sky. Anyway, I want to make a quick comment. This is a rolling cadence like we implemented in version 1.7.1, which was an improved version of the rolling cadence compared to any earlier versions of rolling cadence. So with the way we implemented things in 1.7.1, the inter-night gap really does reduce. We don't start rolling in the first few years or last few years of the survey, so that every time you come across a field during the rolling cadence, you get a full season. So these are things we think improve the rolling cadence. We also thought the rolling cadence improved metrics for the dust-free wide fast deep. So this is where we're starting with our current draft of the baseline, updated baseline. I'll emphasize this is draft. We still have to go through and we think it's a pretty good simulation, but we need to make sure we get proper approval. Looking at sort of our baseline metrics, like wide science category of baseline metrics, we can see pretty good outcomes as a result with this updated baseline. The orange circle here are the previous baseline, the 1.7.1 baseline, and the blue points indicate the updated baseline. So you see that we have, as you get closer into the circle, metrics are falling, things are worse. As you move outwards in the circle, metrics are rising and things are better. This is normalized, so outwards is better. So the number of visits per pointing falls by a very small amount, which also decreases the performance of parallax and proper motion metrics slightly. But the area in the dust-free wide fast deep increases by about 10%. So that boosts the 3.2 figure of merit, which is a dark energy desk collaboration metric that they've contributed towards math. The rolling cadence and increased dust-free area boosts the discovery of supernova. And then the addition of many visits in the bulge of Magellanic clouds increases fast microlensing discovery. And that's by a factor of more than 3, so it's even off the scale here. So the footprint is close enough to the previous baseline. The solar system discovery metrics are fairly stable, as are the number of galaxies and the number of stars. The number of bright stars with at least 10 light curve measurements increases by about 30% due to the increased number of visits in the bulge. So we do expect this to do better for stellar populations, which are focused in the bulge. So overall, these seem fairly good, but I will discuss some areas which may be lacking in metrics as we go through the remainder of this presentation. But this is what we're starting with as our draft update to the baseline simulation. I'll just check real quick that we don't have any questions in in Slack, and it looks like no, not really. So I will keep there. All right. Beyond the changes in the footprint, one of the major changes in the updated baseline is the addition of rolling cadence in the dust free wide fast deep in the baseline. So this is, like I said, a newer version of rolling cadence, like we implemented in version 1.7.1. If you have opinions on rolling cadence based on earlier simulation releases, you really should go and have a look at that family, or just wait for these newer simulations instead. Because we did make some changes in the rolling cadence algorithm, so it does a better job at actually reducing the internight gap between visits. The question of how and whether to implement a rolling cadence, though, is one that I think interacts with the overall footprint question, and is a because if we cover more area, we can keep the internight visit gap shorter if we add a rolling cadence. And you can see that this is preferred by various transient metrics. But obviously there's a trade-off, because we really are just rearranging visits between years. So the trades include less uniform data releases. And while we do monitor the entire sky every year, because we want to do long-term sampling, and we need to be able to build templates for QOs, that does mean that parts of the sky have fairly low sampling rate in these years, where they're not an active focus of rolling. So that said, we do see some benefits so far from adding rolling cadence in the dust-free wide fast deep, in particular in the supernova discovery metric. But more metrics to help evaluate the impact of rolling cadence are something that we can really hope that the community can help us with, and to help us get those metrics into our math code. So this family of simulations is intended to address the question of how much sky should be included in rolling cadence, whether it should be 2 bands, 3 bands, like how much at a time, and also how strong the rolling cadence should be. And it's worth noting that one of these simulations is just the same baseline footprint, but with no rolling cadence at all. So looking at another group of simulations is to look at the U-band visit time. In general, we have to keep 2 by 15-second visits, at least until commissioning, when we may find out that they're not necessary. However, due to the lower sky brightness in U-band, a 15-second visit in U is read noise limited, so we use 1 by 30-second visits for all U-band visits. There are some benefits to moving to even longer U-band visits, which would give you greater individual visit depth. And this was one of the questions posed in the call for cadence notes. There was not consensus on the answer for this, so we have a couple of simulations here which will address this question on our updated footprint. So we'll look at slightly extended U-band visits for 50-second visits, and we'll do 2 different simulations here. One where we keep the total amount of time in U-band constant, so you have fewer visits, and then another where we keep the total number of U-band visits constant, which means spending more time in U-band. Another question that was addressed to some extent in the phase 2 simulations and in the cadence notes was the filter balance. So most cadence notes felt that the general filter balance in the dust-free wide fast deep was fine. However, there were some arguments for increased time spent in blue bands. So these 2 simulations are targeted at looking at the impact of shifting some exposures into G-band, and then some were shifted into G-band and U-band. The updated footprint, so we also have a family where we're looking at fine-tuning some aspects of the footprint. The updated footprint puts approximately the same number of visits per pointing in the northern ecliptic spur as the previous baseline. There's about 260 visits per pointing. However, the area included in the new NES is slightly larger, just to make sure that we get enough visits in GRIZY in the background galactic plane region. So you can see in these plots, especially the one where we boosted the number of visits in the NES, that we've extended the band of NES into this region next to the galactic bulge and down a little bit into the galactic plane. background areas. So in this family, we varied the number of visits per pointing, equivalent to varying the weight on this region or the fraction of the total survey time required. Overall, the NES requires about 5% of the survey time. So varying the number of visits per pointing by even as much as 50% only has a few percent impact on the overall survey requirements. But this is our current plan for what we will do with looking at how much we should weight the NES. Similarly to understanding how much we should weight the northern ecliptic spur, we'll look at how much we should weight the background galactic plane non-bulge regions, basically. So in the updated baseline, the galactic plane region is defined by galactic latitude limits and then constrained further by dust extinction that defines the dust-free, wide, fast, deep, and also then the location of the galactic bulge region. So this is basically everything else that's not, that covers the galactic plane. This is, we get sort of on the order of 230 visits per pointing in this region, and this is slightly more than the previous baseline, where the galactic plane pointings only got about 180 visits per pointing. So this family would vary the weight on the background galactic plane regions, again, by about 50%. And since this takes about 10% of the total survey time, this is again only about a few percent effect on the overall survey. Here's a place where we would really, again, need more metrics, particularly aimed at understanding what the effect is of varying these non-bulge number of visits and how we should change them. This is one of the concerns that I've heard raised here is studying the stellar populations and structure of the Milky Way. So that's an area where we really don't have a lot of metrics, and we'd appreciate some more contributions. So the next family I'd like to talk about is the deep drilling field variations. The scheduling and cadence of the deep drilling fields will be tackled in more depth after this first round of V 2.0 simulations. But what we'll do in this round includes varying the amount of time spent in deep drilling fields generally, from about 5% to 3% and 8%. So it's again about a 50% variation. In addition, we will do a first attempt at looking at what the effect is on rolling deep drilling fields. So basically thought we might just take 2 fields and cycle them on and off. There's a lot of different options you could take in terms of like how to roll the deep drilling fields. But this seemed like a good place to start, and that it would give a lot more information for further fine tuning of the question. We, as a stretch goal, will also look at what happens if we observe one deep drilling field more heavily than the rest, because the deep drilling fields are very concentrated in their RA range. And so this makes that part of the sky a little bit more oversubscribed than a lot of the rest of the sky. But one of the deep drilling fields, the Cosmos field, is separated by a wider range. And so we'll probably look at like observing the Cosmos field more heavily. So over the next 6 months or so, we do hope to upgrade our deep drilling field programming in the scheduler to take account of upcoming lunar cycles. So like if there's going to be a gap where deep drilling field visits won't be as useful because the sky is bright. And this is more relevant because the deep drilling fields take observations in all bands or many bands throughout the lunar cycle. So you end up around full moon, for example, having a time when your bluer band observations are not very useful. So we are thinking about, we're looking into trying to optimize the scheduling of those visits so that you minimize that gap around the full moon, for example. So, but as a result, we're working on upgrading our deep drilling programming. And it's most useful for the deep drilling fields in particular because they are limited in their locations and there's more flexibility in their scheduling. So in the meantime, we are also planning to make a tool available which will let any user quickly, in a few minutes, run a deep drilling field only simulation. So then you could evaluate that with normal math, deep drilling specific metrics. And then you can come back to us and we can work together to come up with other options for deep drilling field scheduling. One thing we are missing when we're looking at the deep drilling field options are deep drilling specific metrics. So clearly there are a lot of science goals which can be boosted with deep drilling field visits, and having these parts of the sky which are very deep and much earlier are deep. But by how much and what are the important considerations? So this is another area where we need community help and feedback. Next, we have two families, this Presto-Color family and our next family, focused on long gaps, which are aimed at cadence nodes which wanted to investigate the effect of adding visits separated by more than the standard pair timing, so the intra-night timing. In the updated baseline, the standard pair timing is 33 minutes, and the Presto-Color family looks at what happens if you add another visit, a third visit in the night about 90 minutes later. The long gaps family, which I'll talk about next, looks at even longer intervals to separations. The third OBS family in phase 1 looked at this to some extent. However, the third observation in those simulations was not always separated by a large interval from the previous pair. So this Presto-Color family will be more targeted at making sure that third visit is separated by about 90 minutes. Because of the fact that when we take 3 visits per night, we can't cover as much area within a given night. So this either results in a shorter season or a longer internight between night gap. And both of those can be undesirable from the point of view of other kinds of transients or variables. So for this reason, we are planning to simulate the Presto-Color sequence for a limited portion of the visits, but we will try this out in a variety of ways. First of all, we'll look at what happens if we just add triplets in the first year. This is before the rolling cadence starts, and maybe could help build variability and transient templates early in the survey. Other options are to look at adding triplets of visits in all years, but at sort of 10, 20, or 30%, not every visit. So this is another situation where we're looking for metrics that will help understand the benefit of these triplet visits on transient discovery and classification in particular. The long gap family has some similar motivations to that Presto-Color family, in that it is motivated by being able to better understand transient and variable star behavior over a variety of timescales. So here, though, the spacing of interest ranges from 2 hours to 14 hours, which has some obvious concerns about the resulting air mass of either one or both of the visits in this sequence. In addition, those longer 14-hour sequence separations are challenging, and even over 2 hours are challenging due to changing weather and sky conditions. So metrics that demonstrate the scientific benefit of these longer gaps will be important to add to math. In this family, again, we don't switch all visits to long separation pairs. In the simulations where we just change the pair separation, we'll do that after year 5, at which point the majority of solar system objects, not all, but the majority, are discovered, and thus can be more easily identified in these visits. In other simulations, we'll try and look for long gaps, but add them as triplets, similar to the Presto-Color family, but with a longer time separation. And then the last family I wanted to talk about are these microsurveys. Formerly, microsurveys were called mini-surveys, but there's a bit of confusion because the NES and the galactic plane have also traditionally been called mini-surveys. So proposed cadences which take under, or regions of the sky which take under 3% of the total time of the survey are now going to be called microsurveys. So these are microsurveys. What are we looking at? The SEOC has just, first of all, we are looking at things that need under 3% of the time, but more than 0.3% of the survey time. And that's because the SEOC has decided to delay consideration of those tiny microsurveys requiring less than 0.3% of the time until after larger questions for the survey strategy have been settled. The other thing is microsurveys don't require a large amount of time, but the survey time is already completely utilized. So adding microsurveys means changing the use of time away from the baseline survey. However, this is even more complicated because natural variations in weather and unexpected downtime in observatory operations mean that it is also completely reasonable to expect a few percent of noise in how much survey time we actually can achieve. So that means for these microsurveys and for some of the optimizations we've been talking about previously, they are essentially also in the noise of the time available. That said, it is worth simulating. It is worth understanding what we want to do, what our approach is, because that will influence what the SEOC decides as the good place to start the survey strategy, and also gives them the information, like if it turns out during commissioning that we can be more effective and maybe we can go to 1 by 30-second visits instead of 2 by 15-second visits, then it tells us what we might want to do with that time. So we will simulate as many as possible of the microsurveys listed here and explore the previous cadence optimizations because it's important to understand the impact of deciding in favor of one survey strategy or another. But it's also useful to keep in mind that the use of the survey time may evolve. One advantage in terms of that for these microsurveys is that they don't all need to be completed during the first year of operations, and they don't necessarily need to be decided during the first year of operations. So we do still have some time to make final decisions for these. And again, metrics demonstrating the benefit of those microsurveys are really important. Oh, sorry, there was one final set of simulations which we will run in phase 2. And these are the retro simulations. So basically, this is the old baseline footprint, but run with our new RubenSim software code. And one of these will be try to be exactly the same as the previous 1.7.1 baseline, and one will be sort of halfway between. It'll be the same old footprint, but with some of the new settings for the 2.0 simulations. And these are mostly not really intended to be suggested survey strategies. They are there as a way that you can look at your old metrics and see if they match what you expect with the new RubenSim code, and so that we can identify any problems or bugs as well. But we do think that they will be useful for people who are looking at the simulations, so that's why I want to mention them here. So that was an overview of the 2.0 simulations. These will be likely to include about 40 simulations. The updated baseline v2.0 should be available shortly. I would say a few weeks, maybe less. And the bulk of the simulations would be available in early October in time for that upcoming SCOC workshop in November. So I wanted to take one more minute and talk about metrics. Let me check, actually, we didn't have, oh, there were some questions on, there were some questions on Slack, and maybe I'll come back and address those in just a second, because this will be fairly quick. I mentioned metrics a few times, and I wanted to come back to this briefly. There are some areas where we think we are likely to have a handle on a representative set of metrics, although of course there's always room for improvement. Where we think we are doing okay is metrics intended to evaluate how well the survey is meeting SRD requirements. These are fairly basic metrics. It's the area of the survey, the number of visits per pointing, as well as expected parallax and proper motion performance. Desk has done a tremendous job in compiling metrics and getting them into math code. So now we have metrics to evaluate static science performance, including the 3 by 2 point figure of merit and the expected effective survey area. That's basically dust-free area that meets certain depth requirements. And as well as metrics to evaluate supernova 1A discovery, strong lens supernova, as well as kilonova detection. The solar system science collaboration has also done a great job compiling and getting metrics into math. So we have metrics to evaluate the discovery rate of various populations, as well as characterization opportunities. For the solar system, there's an additional component of choosing which population to evaluate with these metrics. And we do have a fairly good sample, but more guidance on particular populations, especially when we're considering microsurveys, is still helpful. And we have metrics to evaluate the expected number of galaxies and to estimate the relative number of resolved galaxies, as well as the overall number of stars with and without crowding effects. We can also start to address the number of light curve points we might expect for a stellar population. So this is basically number of stars times number of visits per star at various magnitudes. But we don't claim any of these set of metrics are complete, because you are the experts. And I definitely would not say that they include systematic effects. They do seem to encompass the major science goals for each of these areas, and so we can guide our survey strategy in response. Oh, sorry, and I should point out this plot down here on the bottom right is basically encompassing like highlights from each of these survey areas or metric areas. But there are some other areas where we still clearly need help from the community to quantify the impacts of survey strategy. So these include the questions of what do we want to do or what do we need for the background galactic plane visits. This might bear strongly on stellar populations and determining galactic structure, but we don't have good metrics in this area. Another question relates to the intra-night cadence, in particular triplets and the long gaps families. So here we need more metrics on variable and transient detection and classification to understand the potential benefits of changing this cadence. Also specifically in terms of rolling cadence, which because that's a longer term variation in the cadence, rolling cadence might have other effects as well that we would like to be able to capture. Then we have microsurveys, which need metrics to quantify their benefits, which probably means a metric specific to the science being enabled by the microsurvey. And it's also important to get these metrics into the math, that's the Rubin Sim these days framework, so that we can maintain these and run these independently. So if you put your metric in math and tell us what it's about, and we have some good documentation so we can understand what we're seeing, then we can run those whenever we update the simulations. And it means we don't have to come back to you and ask you to do extra work, and we don't miss your input. So this is really, we love it if you can talk to us, help us get your metrics into math, talk to us if you need help for any of this. We would love to get your metrics. I will close with some links. So this is the first one is the new Rubin Sim software package. So this is a GitHub repo in the LSST organization. And if you follow that link, it's got more information on how to install it. This is basically the old LSST Sims software. So it's Sims math, but it's also the scheduler. So you can now much more easily actually run the scheduler, actually run math. The thing that's different here is that we dropped the LSST stack dependency. So installation is much easier. You basically need a Conda installation to install some dependencies. And then as you can see in the README there's basically a line to install it, the actual software. We're working on getting this fully Conda installable, which is not quite all the way there yet, but it really is like, there's 3 lines that should work. You should have an installed workable version. Then these next few links are the basically a notebook that explains the updated footprint, survey footprint for baseline 2.0. So it gives you more details on the footprint and also how it compares to things like the galactic plane priority map or how this dust-free wide fast deep compares to completely dust-free area. So I think this is interesting background on how we came up with this new footprint. And then this next notebook, the other simulation footprints, just shows some examples of some of the other footprints that we're going to be simulating. It's not complete yet, but we're working on putting some of the other footprints in there. And we're still working on finalizing our v.0 baseline. So what we've presented here has been a draft, but you can take a more in-depth walkthrough of our draft metrics at the link here, and you can compare it to 1.7.1 metrics because I put them in the same location. So I'm gonna stop there and go look at questions on Slack and various other places. And if you have a question, let's go through the Slack questions first, I guess, and then pull up the, just do actual questions here. There's a question from Wes about what does the XXX strength in the rolling cadence variations mean? That's I suspect this was answered. It just means like 90% strength means basically like, yeah, we're rolling and there's like a minimum amount of background visits in the off years. 50% means we're rolling, but we still take more observations in the off rolling years. Okay. So there was a question about how do we go to about contributing metrics. If you look at RubenSim, there's this is where we want you to put your metrics. There's a section in RubenSim, a module, which is math, and there's a section called math contrib. Basically, we want you to do a pull request to RubenSim. And we will write up more detailed documentation because it's changed a little bit from how we did it before when we had this completely separate repo called Math Contrib. And yes, we did take all of the metrics that were in Math Contrib and have moved them into RubenSim. And like I said, we'll write something up on like how to do pull requests to the new RubenSim and put that up online. There was a question from Mario that says, does the RubenSim, the 2.0 draft shows about 200 visits per pointing in the NES? Is that likely for the final version? It is like, as Peter answered, I think it's about the same as the previous 1.7.1 simulation. And yeah, so there was a goal to have about 400 visits per pointing in the NES. And that was the SCOC recommendation. It's just, that's one of the things we will investigate in those variations on the footprint is bringing the number of visits up per pointing up in the NES. We just don't have the time. One of the things that Željko showed was like how much area you could cover and how much time you could cover. I'm going to go back to this baseline footprint. So here, so this is a fully subscribed survey. This is a simulated survey. This is the output. This is not like the input goal. And in this simulation, we get about 830 visits per pointing in all of the wide fast deep areas. The wide fast deep is large. You can take a few visits per pointing out of the wide fast deep and get more time to spend everywhere else. But it's hard because we're also trying to get this very uniform coverage to at least that many visits over the whole sky. So I think this is one of the questions, right? This is one of the questions we're looking at in that variation, that family, like what if you put more visits in the NES? But yeah, this is how much time we have available once you cover the wide, fast, deep regions. That's this dust-free wide, fast, deep, the bulge region, the Magellanic Clouds, and you add in the galactic plane region, background region, and the NES, and the deep drilling fields. And this is just like, if you add up how much time we're trying to spend everywhere, this is 100% of the available survey time. Yeah, this is a great survey question, optimization question, and that's why we have that in that family. You can take the notebook that we have between the sky coverage notebook, that's one of the ones I linked near the end there, and also the other simulation footprints notebook. You can look at what the effect is of changing these various regions and what that means for the overall survey subscription. But yeah, there are lots of things we would like to do, and there's trade-offs, right? This is why we need metrics. Okay. Oh, okay. Fed says perhaps we misunderstood the Presto-Color implementation. So the ideal separation is more than 90 minutes. Okay, well, that's good. I'm glad that came up now. We have not actually simulated those yet, so we can change that separation. So we'll have a look at that. And Fed, we'll make sure we're coming back and talk to you.
Yeah, and I think Eric Belm's cadence note makes much the same point as the Presto-Color. You just need enough time for changes to happen. And if they're too close, they don't tell you about evolution because the evolution just doesn't have enough time to happen.
So I will note that in the phase 1 simulations, we did a family where we looked at varying the time between pairs. And when we extended the pair time to like an hour, we started to lose the second visit in the pair just due to like weather, or sometimes it might be the field setting, but I think a lot of it was weather and downtime. And it just makes a noticeable impact in how many of the visits you actually get in pairs. So I think it's just something we can look at and see what is the effect when you make that revisit time that you want to come back to the field longer.
Excellent. And we are working on a metric for that.
Okay, so here is a question in Slack from Brant Robertson, which he asks, it's likely a basic question, but how are the various metrics weighted? So for example, end visits per pointing versus effective area. How you combine various metrics is challenging. I don't think it's a basic question at all, really. And I think every collaboration comes up with their own idea. And then the SDOC, their challenge is how to weight these different metrics from different groups as well. It is a really good question, and there's different approaches too. So the Solar System Collaboration, for example, has decided the highest priority is discovering objects. And then secondary priorities are being able to characterize those objects. So under the philosophy that first you have to find them, then you can understand what they look like. And so that lends itself to understanding, like, okay, so first I'm going to prioritize discovery, and then I can like, if it's only a small change, but there is a big change in some secondary metric, then that lets me say which survey strategy I prefer. BESC has a paper, which they've recently put on arXiv, where they talk about their process for for each of their metrics and then how they're combining their metrics. And I think it's still complicated because even in desk, there's a tension between the total amount of area that they want in this dust-free sky and the number of visits that they want in the dust-free sky and how uniform they might want those visits versus supernova detection, where that is actually sort of driving us towards this non-uniform kind of sampling where we do the rolling cadence. So I think that how to combine metrics is actually a hard question. And I don't think we have a very good overall answer, and it depends on what your science goals are. And writing that up and getting other people to agree and then presenting it to the SCOC was like the goal for the cadence notes. And I think it still is a reasonable goal. Like clearly not everybody has come to a final decision on like how should they combine their metrics. I think the transients and variables collaboration has a particular challenge here because they have such a wide range of timescales. And so determining the cadence of visits, it will be very different for some kinds of objects versus other kind of objects. And they're the best people to come to an overall agreement on like, okay, this is the best for everybody are the transients and variables experts. And so these are all, I think these are all really good questions and really good feedback to give to the SCOC. And I think that each collaboration has a liaison in the SCOC, and those are really good people to talk to and to make sure that your evolving viewpoint is represented appropriately on the SCOC. Okay, and I think that I got all of the questions on here. There were some comments about like some other things. So for example, wanted to make sure that everybody knows there is one more survey strategy session tomorrow. This is organized by Sarah Benito. And so this is in particular to look at metrics that are missing, maybe also talk about like how to weight metrics together. A lot of these questions about science collaboration experience with metrics will be brought up there. I think that was all the questions I see in Slack and all the questions I see in Zoom. If you still have a question, we have a few minutes. So if you want to unmute and we can just address it right here. Well,
Lynn, I've got a question for you.
mm-hmm.
Will you be able to, it might be really helpful to see like the version 1.7 baselines and the 1.71 baselines compared to this new draft baseline and sort of in percentages of drops of metrics, just to see like what is the relative change, because we can sort of see it in somewhat on some of the plots, but again, like there's been plots shown of like all the different baselines. Yeah, this, but a little, but for showing like the NEO, but showing it for all the 1.7, you know, baseline 2 snaps, 1.7.1 baseline 2 snaps. So like this, but the ones where you do it linearly, where you can see a few of the baselines for each of these metrics.
So that you can see more metrics, you mean, or so that you can see more of the history of baselines?
More of the history.
Okay.
For example, so like you're comparing to 1.7.1, but there is a change from 1.7.1 to 1.7. And so just showing a few of that to get a sense. So if someone looked at 1.7, right, and their metric has changed slightly, then they can understand why and then look at the differences between those.
Yeah, we can do that. I will note that it doesn't go back that far, right? Because as soon as you get to baseline 1.5, the metrics that most people calculated for baseline for 1.5 were for the 1/32 visits. And so that is actually something that's worth commenting on. Going from 1/32 visits, like we did in the majority of the 1.5 simulations, to 2 by 15-second visits, your metrics are likely going to change and be worse. Unfortunately, that's not something that we can, that change we can't make until commissioning, and we have information from on Sky. So so there yes, you're right, it's a good thing, and we'll do that. I just want to caution people to make sure they are thinking about, like, if they're looking at, like, well, my metric changed a lot from baseline 1.5. If you're looking at 1.5, you have to make sure you're looking at baseline underscore 2 snaps 1.5.
Yeah, maybe the better way to say that is for ones that are apples to apples in terms of like baseline. So everything that's 2 snaps, because I think that would be helpful, right? Because there's light curve metrics, et cetera, that I don't see on here for solar system, right? And so being able to see how that changed, I think would be helpful in some kind of.
Yes, I agree. I mean, the reason I don't have all that stuff like online somewhere for you, Meg, is that we basically just finished the draft. We've been changing. I say it's a draft. It really, you should consider it still a draft. Like, I think it's pretty close, but we've been making like small changes to it even over the last week. Like, for example, the first version I had slightly too few visits in the YFast deep, so we ran it again, putting more visits into YFast deep. Then there was like a little bit of problem with where we defined the rolling cadence bands, so we moved those a little bit, ran it again. And then this last one was, so if you go here, you can see that there's like the bulge region and the Magellanic Clouds are kind of, everything is like smoothly joined into regions. And that was because that was an update basically just yesterday to make it look more easier to understand.
Absolutely. I fully understand. I know how much work you've all put into it. But yeah, I think that might be helpful as we go into that November workshop so people get a sense for what's the thing to eye in about what changed. And what thing they actually looked at. And so that might just make it easier so we're all not trying to plot it.
I think that's a great idea, and we'll make sure we have all of the new simulations and all of our metrics run on the new simulations, and those longer, like, you can see all the metrics kind of thing, and using that to compare against all of the recent similar baselines is fine. We'll make something like that big CSV file that we did for at the end of phase 1 available for metrics we've run with the new simulations, and then also bring in some of the old simulations. So if people have particular old simulations they would like us to make sure we run our new metrics on, because the metrics have been updated a bit since phase 1, send a note to me or Peter, and we'll make sure that when we rerun the metrics on the new set, we include that particular older simulation. But as a starting point, we'll just include the old baselines that were 2 snaps.
Great, thank you very much.
Right. Well, that's at the top of the hour. If you have more questions, there's still Slack, and you can come and ask us questions there. We try to be very friendly. And yeah, come talk to us. We're happy to help. We want to get metrics into math. We want to be able to do the best job answering any of the survey cadence questions that we can. The SCOC is here to help you too. They want to be able to make the best decisions they can. And yeah, we'll be at the survey strategy session tomorrow. So that's another place to make sure you go.